Hello and welcome to Book Lust. I'm Nancy Pearl. My guest today at the Seattle Public Library is Seattle's Mayor, Ed Murray. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for stopping by at the end of a busy day to talk books.
Thank you for having me. This is my favorite thing to talk about.
So, were you a reader? Have you been a reader your whole life?
So it's actually an interesting story. I come from a large family, and I came home from third grade the first day of school, and I handed my mother a piece of paper that said, "These are the words I need to learn how to spell." And what I'd written down were the first 5 words. And she goes, "Okay, where are the words?" And she kind of figured out that I was a great talker, but I couldn't basically read. And I had troubles learning how to read. But through that year, at Holy Rosary in West Seattle, in the Junction, through that year between my mother and Sister Mary Bernadette, I ended the class as the top reader. Wow. And so it's been an obsession of mine ever since. But initially it was an embarrassing struggle.
Oh yeah, so it was a form of dyslexia or just something that's never been fully explained?
I had troubles learning. I actually don't know why.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember in first and second grade kind of being put in the reading.
The slow readers.
The slow readers.
Yeah, that's
and
hard.
For whatever reason, something clicked in the third grade, and I've been obsessive about reading ever since.
Was it a book? Do you remember like the first book that just, I often think that people who say they don't like to read, I often think it's because nobody ever helped them find the book that would turn them into a reader.
So my mother asked me what did I want to have her read to me, and I wanted to have her read PT 109. Of course, It's early 60s. Kennedy is a hero even for us grade school kids, and here this guy is in the war, and his boat gets split in 2, and he rescues people. So I had her read that to me 2 or 3 times, and it got me interested in wanting to read it. And then Dr. Seuss books were, I started out in third grade with Dr. Seuss, and it was really very, very instrumental in getting me there, catching my imagination.
Right.
So.
When we think of Dr. Seuss these days, we sort of think about Hop on Pop and Horton Hears a Who and all those kind of limited vocabulary ones that he did later. But the early ones, the 500 Hats of Bartholomew Cubbins, do you remember that?
Yes.
And to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street, those were so...
Yeah,
so wonderful.
Those very early ones, and Cat in the Hat and the like. So,
right.
But I come from a family of readers, and it's very interesting to me. My nephew's son, at 18 months, became obsessed with books. So, runs in the family.
I mean, partly it seems like you became a reader because your mother was a reader,
right?
And sort of wanted you to share that with her,
right? Very much so. I mean, she was a reader. A prolific reader, and all of her 7 children are prolific readers. We're pretty obsessed with books, and as my husband will tell you, I read everywhere I can read. I'll read getting dressed in the morning, I'll read anywhere I can. So
now, do you listen to books, or are you?
So when I was in the legislature and I would go back and forth to Olympia, I spent 18 years going back and forth to Olympia in the car, and at some point, even NPR became boring to me.
Right.
So at the time,
hard to believe.
Yeah, hard to believe, and I love it. But
right.
I did listen to books on tape or on CDs at that point.
And did you find then, because I assume you were reading
Right.
you were reading traditional print as well
Right.
as listening.
Yes.
Did you find a difference?
My mind wandered when I would listen to books, and I would miss pieces. Where if that happens when you have a book in front of you, you can go back and catch yourself.
Right.
But I tend to be more engrossed in the written word than I was in listening to it.
And I always feel that when you're reading a book, when you're reading a traditional print book, the relationship is between you and the author. It's you and the author struggling with this text that he or she has written. But when you're listening to a book, then a third person has now entered the conversation.
Right.
And oftentimes your liking of the book or not liking the book depends on who's reading it.
Their voice, how they say it.
Exactly.
And they bring their own interpretation to it.
Exactly.
So,
yeah, which is not not so much fun.
Yeah.
Well, so let's talk about the other, books on tape. They're not books on tape anymore. That shows our age.
Yeah. That's right, it does.
Downloaded books, audio books.
Yeah.
But what about, are you an e-reader reader?
So I'm a gadget person, and I do have a Kindle, and I do enjoy my Kindle. I enjoy it mostly when I travel. I have spent my whole life, on airplanes with a huge pack of books because I was afraid I'd be somewhere without a book. On the other hand, I'm one of those people who I seem to retain less when I read a Kindle, and it seems to be less exciting. For instance, I'm not a shopper. I have no interest really in buying clothes. It doesn't excite me. But when I go into a bookstore, when I go into LA Bay or university bookstores, I'm very excited.
Yeah.
And just the experience of the cover and reading and looking at samples and holding it and underlining it and being able to fold the pages. Even though you can do some of that electronically, the physical experience for me is still much more intimate.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we forget when we talk about books and the experience of reading a book is how much aesthetics plays into that. The creaminess of the page and the typeface and just the whole sort of notion of, you're holding this much left with your left hand, so that's how much you've read already. I mean, all of that you don't get on an e-reader, and I too just take my e-reader when I travel now, and knowing that you can download books from the library wherever you are is just such a boon, I think, to us travel e-reader people.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great thing, but for me, it will not replace books until we no longer have a house and I have nowhere to put my books. Which I hate to let go of. So
I imagine, because you're a reader, that there are some books that even though you're not going to reread probably, you just want them in near you because they have recreate such an experience somehow.
They do, and occasionally I pull them out and I remember a quote, or I can find a paragraph that I want to use in something I'm going to give a speech about or write about. So.
I always, that happens to me with Agatha Christie mysteries, and I'll go through and read all the Agatha Christie mysteries, and then I'll think, oh, I've read them, I don't need to read them again, I don't need to keep them anyway, so I'll trade them in at Magus, and trade them in for more books. And then I'll sort of be falling asleep one night, and I'll think, now, who killed that person in that book? And they'll have to go out and re-get the book and all of that to look at again. Yeah. So I think it's just some passages and there's so many memories associated with particular books and particular times. Well, was there a book that was, or more than one book that was influential in your life?
I was asked this recently. I was at a grade school and I read a Dr. Seuss book on Dr. Seuss's birthday a few weeks ago. And the kids asked me that, and I didn't have a good answer, and I've thought a lot about it since. So when I think of literature, I really do think of the brothers Karamazov and Dostoevsky. And I actually quoted that in a speech I gave on homelessness recently. The Japanese writer Endo has written a series of books, but his book Silence I read just after college at a point where I was kind of trying to come to grips with who I was as a person, as a trying to come out, trying to deal with the issue around spirituality, trying to deal with conflicting cultures, my interest both in my own Catholicism and in Buddhism, and Endo, in novel after novel, touches on those themes. So, also I think that there have been books such as Dorothy Day's book, The Long Loneliness, which influenced my sense of a commitment to social justice. There's a book about Charles Stewart Parnell, the great Irish parliamentarian who tried to get Irish independence through the British process. Who really influenced my own abilities as a legislator. So a lot of political biographies. So there's probably a couple of shelves full of books, I could say, at a different point in my life, really influenced who I was.
So Thomas Merton, was he
Yes.
somebody who was
Yes.
important to you
Yes.
as yeah.
He was.
Yeah.
My mother actually gave my brother a book on Merton, his autobiography, The Seven Story Mountains. And after he read it, I read it. And as a result, in college, a group of us would go out on weekends, every few months and stay at a Trappist monastery. And again, it introduced me to the idea of being contemplative, of silence, of spending some time centering yourself. And for me, being raised Catholic and dealing with my own issues as a gay person was not always a positive experience. So to also, Merton's writings and that experience of the Trappists gave me a positive experience of my own tradition.
And Dorothy Day's would too, of course, I think, to give you that other thing.
Both strangely, Episcopalian converts to Catholicism. Probably today would be the opposite.
So your books at home, how are they arranged?
So upstairs in our den are all my biographies on basically politicians. Whether it's Gandhi, the Kennedys, Churchill, you name it. And downstairs I have my books organized by, I have a real interest in Irish history and Irish literature. Love I inherited from my grandparents, and for a while I belonged to a book club out of Galway, and they would send me a few books every month, which I was not reading. So I have those books. I have my philosophy books from college, probably the ones I refer to most often, sort of my political books, and then books on mostly Buddhism and Catholic spirituality. And literature, I should say, those are there too. And those are like stacks.
So what is the best, or what are some of the best political biographies that you've read?
So the best political biography of all times is Robert Carroll's series on Lyndon Johnson. When I bought the first book, I wasn't particularly interested in the Texas Hill Country. By the end of the page 10, I couldn't put the book down. Robert Carroll also wrote a book on Robert Moses called The Rise and Fall of New York. Incredible book. Anybody who's interested in government, works in government, should read that book. So those books jump out at me. Political autobiographies can be less rewarding, but
agree.
Nelson Mandela's own autobiography is probably one of the best written political autobiographies I've ever read.
Did you want to go to his funeral? Did you go to his funeral?
I did not. I mean, I would have loved to have gone to his funeral. I'm sure I was in Olympia in session, and you can't travel. I did have a chance to go to Cape Town, and we were doing some HIV/AIDS work when I was in the Senate. And I did go to Robbins Island, and I did visit the cell where he spent decades.
18 years.
18 years.
I think.
Amazingly small, tiny place for a very, very tall man. I did get to meet him when he came to Seattle U.
Oh, really?
So it was great.
Wow. Did you, one of the political biographies that I liked a lot was William Manchester's biography of Churchill.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Yes, and I have read the first 2 volumes.
Right.
And I'm halfway through the 3rd volume.
Oh, you are?
And I am not sure that it measures up to the first 2.
Yeah, that was one of the saddest literary events, that when he died in the middle of writing, or at some point in that.
Yeah.
But the first 2 I just remember, were so readable.
Yeah, very readable.
Yeah.
And the first part of the 3rd volume starts out that way, and you kind of go, what are the complaints about? Later on, you can tell William Manchester is not involved in writing it. So.
Yeah. Some more books, other sort of political books that I think, that I found very interesting when I read, and sometimes think I should reread, are that whole Making of the President series.
Yes.
Were those influential to you?
And I have all the copies.
Oh, you do?
I do, including, of course, in 1960 I was 5, so I didn't buy it then, and I couldn't read. But no, very, very influential.
Yeah.
Very, very influential.
Right.
Obviously, that whole period of time in the 60s inspired a lot of people in my generation to go into public service.
Yeah, and then that wonderful biography by Blanche Cook of Eleanor Roosevelt. I don't know if you.
I have not read that.
I think that would
should
be
read
one that
yeah.
you would. I think that's the best biography because it's a feminist take on Eleanor Roosevelt, who was a feminist. You know,
Yes.
an early feminist.
Yes.
So, what are you reading now, even as we speak?
So I'm reading a book called City of Ambition, and I can't remember the author's name, but it is about FDR and LaGuardia, the mayor of New York, and their partnership to make New York City a better city at the height of the Depression when FDR was president. And it's a good study, case study, in why cities can be great places to start ideas, but why we need the federal government to help us deal with problems. And it's a very kind of exciting take on relationships that don't exist very much anymore between cities and the federal government. So,
what do you read for fun? Well, I'm not going to say for fun because I think that you're a reader who everything is fun in one degree or another.
yeah. So I have to admit, I love novels, but I often read history to relax by. I don't know why. Maybe because novels often require a certain emotional engagement, and so I have to be up for it. But I love murder mysteries. I love different genres of murder mysteries. I love murder mysteries that are, located in a certain period of history or a certain place. New York in the 19th century, Ireland. The Scandinavian murder mysteries that have become so popular. There's a whole series of gay and lesbian murder mysteries that have been written over the years. Maybe the first one that I liked was called Tales of the City. And I was able to kind of grow up with that series from the excitement of the 70s to the horror of AIDS in the 80s and 90s to moving on to maturity later on.
One of the best series of gay novels that came out of the 70s were written by Michael Nava, N-A-V-A.
Yes.
Dave Branstetter was the insurance investigator.
Yes. I own that entire series.
You do?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
And based in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Yes.
I see. I'm going to have to make a trip to West Seattle and
I
look
live in North Capitol Hill.
Oh, well,
I was raised in West Seattle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, even better.
Yeah.
That's closer to me. I
No,
think I'm going to
own
have to
those.
come over there.
I keep my murder mysteries. So.
Yeah, those were really, really good. And and I bet you have like a hardback first edition copy of When the Band Played On.
I do.
The Randy Schultz wonderful novel, wonderful nonfiction history.
I do still have that book. It is a book that I suspect I will never reread. I held on to it thinking I would, but probably it's too painful to go back and relive that period of our history.
And I think that that's what I was thinking about when I said that there are some books you just want to have, whether or not you're going to go back to them because they're so important in one way or another. So besides mysteries, I think we talked a little bit about, you read Garth Risk Hallberg's book, City on Fire.
Yeah. It's about New York in the 1970s. I read it over New Year's. It was a great read. I lived in New York for a while in the mid-70s, and you could feel the city at a very bad point in its history. And it can kind of remind you how cities can go very bad. Great cities can go very bad. Good read, entertaining.
I could not get into that book. Much as I tried.
There are no particularly endearing characters in the novel. So.
And is that important? Well, evidently it's not that important to you because you read it.
I read it.
Yeah.
I prefer a novel where I can maybe see a character or two that I maybe not identify with, but admire in some way. And so I prefer novels where there's some of that.
Well, so what are some books that you've, and I hate this question, I hate it when people ask me this question, so I'm going to ask you, sort of passing it off to you. What are some books that you just couldn't finish?
So I hate to admit this, but because I'm a big fan of C.S. Lewis, his other writings, but his Chronicles of Narnia, didn't do it for me.
Wow.
Everything I've read about J.R.R. Tolkien, I think I should love his series. Right. But beginning in high school when we were assigned The Hobbit, I just could not get into it.
Wow. Yeah.
I love the movies, and Harry Potter much the same way. I loved the first 2 novels, and then it just didn't hold my interest.
So do you think it's just the whole fantasy genre
it could be.
is something that, I mean, that you're much more interested in reality, the kind of concreteness of it?
Perhaps it could be. There's some science fiction I've read that I've liked, but then again, it's not a big area that attracts my attention. So,
do you feel compelled to finish books?
I used to think it was wrong not to, and
morally wrong.
Just like a failure, personal failure. What's wrong with you?
Sin.
Yeah, it's like, why aren't you concentrating?
Yeah, right.
I have to admit, last 2 years in this new job as mayor of Seattle, there have been more than one book I have put down and have not finished.
People always ask me, how can I read so much? And I say the reason I can read so much is that I only read what I want to read. That is, the minute that I'm not enjoying a book, I stop reading that book. Yeah. I just think there's not time is precious. I mean, it's the most precious thing that we have, and to waste it on a bad book seems like the biggest sin of all to me.
Yeah, you're probably right. I still would prefer to finish books, but and I would say the Kindle, it's so easy to see a book and buy the book and then read the book and go, ooh, because you can just push a button. Right. You don't have the same process in a bookstore, so some of those I don't finish.
Oh, good.
Yeah, well, on the Kindle.
Yeah, so, maybe you'll change a little bit. You'll kind of get into the not finishing.
Yeah, I'm more into it now than I was. So.
When you think about the books that you would give to other people, I mean, you talked about like a book that you thought every politician should read. I mean, are there some books that you think that every person concerned with the future of the world should read?
So I'm famous for giving books as gifts. So it depends on the person and the subject and maybe what caught my attention at that time. My first year in office, Boys in the Boat, I was passing out right and left. I couldn't get over how great that book was. If I were to give books to city council members, there would be 2. One is called Hugh Carey and the Rescue of New York, 1975. Hugh Carey was a Democratic governor, the liberal governor, who basically had to move New York back from the brink of bankruptcy, and basically the state and the feds took over the financing. It's just a lesson in, if everything's good and you fund everything, eventually you're going to get in trouble. Another one is The Ungovernable City, which is about John Lindsay, the John Lindsay years in the 1960s. It's about that thick. But I think it is a friend of mine who went to work for Mayor Bloomberg said that when he went to work for Mayor Bloomberg, a reporter said, read this book, and then come talk to me about, whatever it is you want to talk to me about. And again, it is a real case study in how cities can be governed or how cities can be misgoverned. So if I were to give council members books, that's what I would give folks.
And if you could give a book to just an ordinary person said to you, well, give me a book that shows me what the political life is like.
So, occasionally I've taught classes at Seattle U's Public Administration School, and I've actually required people just choose a book on any politician. I don't care if I don't like them, just choose a book. It can be Reagan, it can be Nixon, it can be whomever, but choose one. So regrettably, I'm not going to choose one for you. And I think the most important thing, particularly right now, because we're in a period of a lot of anger, in a period of a lot of idealism, both I think are good in their own way. Both can go very wrong. Idealism can lead to bitterness. I would say choose a politician and read their biography, because what you will see is a very human process. We tend to idolize people, and we tend to forget that, John Kennedy was more popular after he was dead than when he was president. That Lincoln spent most of his term unpopular, and there was questions months before he won re-election whether he was going to be president. That's why I would encourage people to read books who are interested in social change. These are not easy journeys.
Well, I think that you talked about the Robert Caro biographies
Right.
of Lyndon Johnson, and I think that to me, as well as what you said, that's kind of, I mean, that's the ideal biography.
Right.
Because it shows Johnson as a three-dimensional person with his flaws and his good points and the mistakes he made and the crooked deals, and everything is all right there. And I think that you come away from reading those books, no matter how you went, no matter what your opinion of Johnson was going in,
Right.
it's going to be different coming out
Yeah.
of that reading experience.
And with Johnson, you'll feel like, wow, he did things that are amazing, and then you'll read it and go, what a very creepy person.
Right.
In many
Right.
ways. You know, a book I think that is a good illustration, and I'm not going to remember the name of it, but it's by a guy named Jack Newfield, and it's a biography on Robert Kennedy. And Jack Newfield basically followed Robert Kennedy in his last campaign before he was assassinated. And Jack Newfield talks about, you know, being in New York, being Jewish, watching this redheaded Irish Catholic guy running for U.S. Senate and running for president. He didn't like him, but the things he didn't like about him, he watched Robert Kennedy grow and change and mature. So there are also, I think, books that show that we are capable, even politicians, of learning from our mistakes and of becoming deeper because of the pain we come in contact with. So Jack Newfield's book on Robert Kennedy.
Good. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks.